Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark. Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. Today, we're looking at Greg Koukl answering a viewer question on his channel, Stand to Reason. Their video is titled, How to Engage with Postmodernists About Sin, Guilt, and Repentance. Well, for starters, you can stop using labels like postmodernists unless they're labels that the person you're talking to will actually agree with. And really, postmodern is one of those labels that can mean different things to different people, so maybe just focus on people's actual positions and beliefs rather than trying to fit them into some predefined bucket. And along those lines, rather than quibbling about whether Greg is technically correct in what he says about postmodern beliefs, I'm just going to address the things that he's actually saying. Definition fights are boring at the best of times. So let's get into it. But first, a word from our sponsor, Surfshark. Are you tired of scrolling through your streaming services, not being able to find something new and interesting to watch? Do you live in a place that has overly intrusive controls over streaming sites featuring specific types of, spicy content? Well then, have I got a solution for you! Surfshark VPN is a virtual private network which allows you to appear to be connected to the internet from any location where Surfshark has a server. By connecting through Surfshark, you can access streaming services from different geographic locations. This means you may have access to additional libraries of movies and TV shows that aren't available in your home area. But that's not all they do. With their Clean Web 2.0 features, you can automatically block ads, reject unwanted cookies without fumbling through the pop-up first, get alerts when a website was the target of a data breach, and block malware. Seriously, if Clean Web 2.0 were the only product that they offered, that would be more than worth their price just for getting rid of the cookies pop-up. But considering that you also get a VPN that adds an extra layer of encryption to your data, keeping you safe when connected to public networks, even if they've already been compromised, it's a steal. Surfshark VPN is easy to use and simple to install. They do not monitor, track, or store your data, and it works on phones, tablets, and laptops with no extra fees. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it out completely risk-free. Right now, they've dropped their prices significantly for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and you still get an extra 4 months added to your subscription for free. So go to surfshark.com/rhino for 4 extra months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. Again, that's surfshark.com/RHINO for an extra 4 months for free. This is a limited time offer, so sign up today. And remember, by signing up for Surfshark VPN, you're helping to support my channel, so thank you.
So we're going to start with one from Dean. In a postmodern world, what tools do believers have to start a conversation about the need for repentance?
Starting off as vaguely as possible, I see. Great. Like, are we starting this hypothetical conversation off with someone who is a Christian but disagrees about the specifics of repentance? Is it an atheist who doesn't think that there's anyone there watching to see if you're repentant? Is it someone of another religion that has a different take on repentance? Your approach should be different depending on your answer to this question, but the original question just doesn't give us enough information to go on.
I understand the question. It come up a lot because the culture is so relativistic. Okay.
Reality itself is relativistic, Greg, whether you like it or not. And I mean that in the most literal of senses. Because of relativity, time passes differently depending on your frame of reference, a fact of reality that needs to be accounted for in order for GPS satellites to work. So because reality at its core is relative, our perception and interpretation of reality as colored by the subjective nature of our experiences is also doomed to be relative in nature. Now, this doesn't mean that everything is necessarily relative for the purposes of determining facts about reality. If a rock exists in a specific location, then that fact about reality won't change based on flawed perception of the people observing that rock. It's still there, existing. But my point is that relativism isn't as simple a concept as Greg is inevitably going to make it out to be.
In this case, postmodern, radical relativism, especially when it comes to morality, they are still human beings made in the image of God, and they have to live in the world that God made.
Well, here's the thing about that. No. I mean, yes, we are all human beings that have to live in the world together, but no, God didn't make it, and especially when it comes to morality, Christians are just wrong about it. Well, most Christians. Unlike Greg, I don't just paint diverse groups of people with one brush, but Greg's kind of Christians are wrong about morality. Oh, but how can I say that under moral relativism without an objective moral standard? Well, I have an objective moral standard. Well-being. Increase well-being, decrease harm. It is objectively true that being discriminated against decreases the well-being of LGBTQ people, and Greg has definitely contributed to this discrimination. Ergo, Greg has objectively contributed to decreasing the overall well-being and increasing harm. Thus, Greg is in the wrong, morally speaking. You may not like the standard that I use, but if your standard is one that sometimes results in actions that increase harm and decrease well-being being called morally good, then I would ask why your standard is one that is even worth considering in the first place. And sure, apologists will ask how we determine that well-being is the standard we should use, but like, come on. Do we really need to philosophize about something as basic as, hey, more people being better off is better than more people being worse off? Apologists try to turn morality into this complex word game, make it seem like it's difficult, if not downright impossible, to come up with any system of morality without appealing to an external being that imposes morality upon us. But it's not. It's quite basic, and I'm honestly kind of tired of them pretending like it's not.
Okay, now this is at the core of the Inside Out tactic, which is in the 10-year anniversary edition of the book.
Yeah, just a reminder that Greg wrote a book called Tactics, which is mostly advice on how to steer conversations towards your predetermined outcome, rather than, having a conversation where you could respond to things that people are actually saying because you were actually listening to them. To see my response to one of his incredibly dishonest tactics, check out this video where he has to pretend that something is only healthcare if it involves treating an illness in order to get away from the fact that abortion is healthcare.
And the point there is that God has built things on the inside of every human being that eventually comes out when they're not, especially when they're not guarding turf.
Well, a sharp enough point there will make the insides come out. What? I didn't say anything. I'm not suggesting anything.
Sometimes they're even guarding turf and it still comes out, like a person who says, well, morality is relative. There's no absolute right or wrong. Okay, so therefore it's wrong for you to push your morality on me.
I'm not convinced that anyone has ever actually said that. I've seen it asserted by apologists many times, but I don't think I've ever even seen someone say that in one of those man-on-the-street style videos where it would be really easy to get people to say things like that.
Okay, notice there's the contradiction built right in. On the one hand, they're speaking from their philosophy of relativism, but then the next statement, they are making a moral claim. It's wrong for you to do such.
Yeah, it is wrong for you to impose your antiquated and objectively bad moral beliefs on people who do not hold them. And we know that it is wrong because when your moral beliefs are imposed on people, it does real harm to those people. So if our goal is to maximize well-being, your moral beliefs are wrong and you are wrong to try and impose them on people. If you cannot agree with the goal of maximizing well-being, then why the fuck are we even talking about this?
So actually, if morals are relative, it can't be wrong for anyone to push anybody's morality on anybody else.
Congrats! You found the fatal flaw in a position that nobody holds. Gold star!
It's just whatever one is capable of doing. That's the only limitation, power.
And your system of, even when it is objectively harmful, we need to use God as the absolute moral standard because he's the all-powerful creator, is not about power? Pull the other one.
But why do they say things like that?
Because when you're constructing your straw man of positions you don't understand, you need it to be easy to defeat.
Why does Richard Dawkins say that we live in a world in which there's no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference?
Because that's an accurate way of describing the universe. It behaves as though that is a true statement, and so it falls to us to figure out how to make this universe suck less than it does on its own. And the development of moral systems is one of the ways that we have done that. But also, fuck Dawkins. Find someone else to quote mine to make your point. Everybody's sick of you guys appealing to Dawkins as a spokesperson for all of atheism. Or, I guess, postmodernism in this case? I think when Greg says postmodern, he just means atheist. Even if that's not what he means, that does seem to be the way he's treating it, so it looks that way.
Well, that's the way the world is. If materialism is true, that's consistent with his view, but then he complains about the God of the Bible being an immoral God.
Yeah. With those moral systems we developed that are based on increasing well-being and decreasing harm, the God of the Bible is indeed immoral. There is no question here. Everything from the genocides he commanded in the Old Testament to that time when he killed a couple people for not giving enough money to the church in the New Testament, to the fact that he designed the world in a way that would ensure that most people to ever exist will wind up in hell, the Bible makes it quite clear that God does not do what is best for humanity.
Well, wait a minute. Where did that morality just come from? So on the one hand, he's speaking from the perspective of his philosophy. Next, he's speaking as a human being made in the image of God by making the moral judgment on God.
Nope. If he were speaking as a human being made in the image of God, then presumably he'd agree with God's moral system and so would not be able to conclude that God is immoral. Apologists love to pretend that we need to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to pass judgment on God's actions. But that's just not true. In the Christian worldview, it is impossible to pass judgment on God's actions, as that worldview holds that God's actions are always morally perfect no matter what they are. So the very act of passing judgment on God's actions is, rather than borrowing from Christianity, utterly rejecting it.
Now, I don't think his moral judgment is accurate, but the act of making the moral judgment is consistent with being human.
On that second part, we agree. It is consistent with being human. It is not, however, consistent with the Christian worldview. Thus, it is not borrowing from Christianity, as apologists so frequently claim.
Okay, so what this amounts to in terms of this question is that you can always you can count on the fact that there is something true that every person is aware of, even if they're not aware of it.
You're kidding me, right? Like, are you seriously spending the first few minutes of your video attacking a straw man of secular morality by saying that there are no absolute moral facts, so you imposing your morality on me is absolutely wrong, is a self-defeating statement, before immediately going on to say that everyone is aware of these things, even if they're not aware of it? Did you somehow not see the self-defeating nature of that statement? Could you not have used a different word to make it less obviously self-defeating? Dude literally wrote the book on tactics to use while talking to people, but if this is the sort of thing you can expect, probably don't waste your money on that book.
And what I mean here is a dispositional belief. They may not be consciously thinking about it, but it's something they believe deep down inside, which informs their talk and their behavior.
So to translate that out of apologetics-ese, I know more about what's in your head than you do, so if you disagree with something that I'm saying about how your thought processes work, I'm right and you're wrong. QED.
This is why people say the things that in both of those illustrations that I offered that they say. And the fact is, people know they're broken. They know they're broken.
Ah, yes, that good old-fashioned thing that Christians do where they say, you guys really, 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 really suck, so that's why you need to come to the church, and here's the collection plate while you're here. While nobody's perfect is a true statement, that does not mean that everyone is this horrible piece of shit that deserves eternal torture.
A good introduction to this concept is in Mere Christianity. Just take the first 4 or 5 pages of that book, because he's talking about the way people talk about morality.
Yeah, so I'm considering doing a series on Mere Christianity at some point, because I remember thinking it was this amazing book when I was a Christian, but as an atheist, when I've reread some of it, it just completely misses the ball. For example, in the opening pages that Greg is talking about, he brings up the Nazis and says that we can't call them wrong unless there's a standard that we all agree is right. Immediately after bringing up the Nazis, he mentions the objection to the moral argument, that is the fact that different societies over time have had different moral systems, showing that there is no absolute moral standard that all humans can agree on. He responds to this by saying, there have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. Again, I cannot stress this enough, this was immediately after invoking Nazi Germany as a society that is undeniably in the wrong. And the whole book is like that, with him contradicting his own points, sometimes while explicitly acknowledging the contradiction, without doing anything to address those contradictions.
On the one hand, they'll claim there is no morality. Then they say, well, that's not fair. I gave you my piece of orange. Why don't you give me your piece of orange? Or you shouldn't be cutting in line in front of me, or something like that. And he said all of these kinds of comments reflect a basic understanding of morality that's built in.
And that basic understanding is no more profound than I don't like it when things like that happen to me, so through empathy, I can understand that other people don't like it when things like that happen to them either. No God required, just human preferences. And as a nice little bonus, the fact that it ultimately comes down to preferences explains why different societies have had different moral systems over the years.
And it betrays or belies the claims we're making about being, say, in this case, a postmodernist. That can always be appealed to, okay? There's 2 ways to do it, it seems to me. One way is to just ask questions about the contradiction.
If done with the intent of actually coming to understand the other person's perspective, absolutely. Ask all the questions. But I know enough about Greg to say with a high level of confidence that it's more about manipulating the conversation towards your predetermined goal than actually having a 2-way interaction.
Wait a minute, I'm confused. What do you mean you're confused? Well, you just told me there's no objective morality. Yes, of course. Well, then how can it be wrong for me to push my morality on you?
So here's the thing with questions like that. Although apologists will often frame this in terms of high-impact crimes like murder, like, hey, if morality is just like your opinion, man, then why would it be wrong for me to murder you? In reality, this question is about the Christian desire to invade your personal space. So whenever you hear an apologist ask a question like that, mentally rephrase it to be about something more along the lines of LGBTQ rights. If morality is just your opinion, then why would it be wrong for me to dictate who you are and are not allowed to marry? Because it's none of your goddamn business who I marry, that's why. If morality is just your opinion, then why would it be wrong for me to dictate your gender expression? Because it's none of your goddamn business how I express myself, that's why. When looked at on the whole, the most consistent way to apply these sorts of social rules is with the principle of your right to swing your fist ends at my face. You can do whatever the fuck you want, as long as your doing so doesn't infringe on someone else's right to do whatever the fuck they want. Which means that you don't get to tell me who I'm allowed to love, nor do you get to murder me just because you want to.
That's the question, okay? So actually it's a Columbo number 1. It's a request for clarification. What do you mean by that? But it's a little more pointed because you're also trying to make your point. This is Columbo number 3 in play here also, where you're making a point with your question.
Yeah, there we go. Didn't take him long to acknowledge that the purpose of the question isn't really to actually fully understand the other person's position. It's to drive the conversation towards your predetermined goal.
And you're making the point that your comments are contradictory, you're inconsistent, so tell me which is true. Is it wrong to push my morality on you? Okay. Or is there no morality at all?
Why do you think that's a binary choice? Either it's wrong for you to push your morality on me, or morality just doesn't exist at all? I mean, firstly, yes, it is wrong for you to push your morality on me, but this question just strikes at the complete lack of understanding of any moral philosophy other than your own. Your ignorance does not an argument make.
Here's another approach, though, and that is you just go to the existential issue. Existential issue being the awareness that people have of their own actual state. People know they're guilty.
Guilty of what? I don't think I'm particularly guilty of anything. Again, I will happily acknowledge that I am not perfect, and I know I have and will continue to do things that are not necessarily going to be upstanding moral actions, but there's nothing there that would justify a punishment of eternal torture. Also worth mentioning is that me being aware of my own transgressions against my own moral code in no way indicates the existence of an external absolute moral code.
How do they know they're guilty? Because they feel guilty.
Most of the time, I do not feel guilty at all. And my living situation is one that Christian morality very explicitly disapproves of. I am unwed, living in sin with a divorced woman. According to your worldview, I should be feeling guilty about that all the time. But I'm just not. I'm also very open about the fact that I sometimes watch porn. Another thing that you think I should feel guilty about, but do not. So where is the guilt that I'm supposed to be feeling at all times? And how is you playing into a feeling that is not there supposed to do anything to advance this hypothetical conversation?
You know, they feel guilty about all kinds of things, and they have to quell it or try to disregard it or say, well, that doesn't apply to me. And Lewis talks about this, too, in the first few pages of Mere Christianity. That's an unjust law. So I'm exempted. The excuses that we give are ways of saying, well, in my circumstance, I'm exempted from that moral law. That's kind of what's going on there.
Counterpoint. I don't feel like I'm exempted from your moral law saying that I shouldn't live with someone that I'm not married to. That law is just entirely irrelevant. I don't need to make an excuse as to why. Why do I live with her? Because I want to. Is it justified in the Christian worldview? Nope. Do I care? Not a whit. And of course, the examples that C.S. Lewis gave that he's talking about, cutting in line or not sharing food after someone else has already shared their food with you, are things that can be changed depending on circumstances. I have, on multiple occasions, allowed someone to cut in front of me in line at the grocery store because I've got a full cart and they're just buying like one or two things. And I've also been on the opposite side of that interaction where others have allowed me to cut. And maybe I shared my orange with you earlier because you were pregnant and craving an orange. That in no way obligates you to share yours with me later on, and my expectation of a perfect one-to-one reciprocation actually undercuts the kindness of the original act. To share because you expect them to reciprocate later, rather than just because you had enough to share and wanted to be kind, turns the act from a gesture of goodwill into social calculation, calling the morality of the original action into question. question. Maybe it's not all the way immoral, but it's at least a gray area. This actually reminds me of an anecdote from one of the popular self-improvement books, I think it was How to Win Friends and Influence People, where a guy gets on the train with 3 rowdy kids who are being loud and obnoxious and just generally annoying all the other passengers, while the dad just sits there, seemingly not paying attention. A passenger confronts him and tells him to keep his kids in line, at which point he explains that they've just left the hospital and were there to say goodbye to the kid's mother as she died. That immediately shifts the view of the situation from this dad being an inattentive father who is oblivious to the disturbances being caused by his kids, to a sympathetic view of an overwhelmed father doing his best while his kids are processing what they just went through. In one of these views, the man is seen as immoral. In the other, he is the object of sympathy. It's the same man doing the exact same thing, but the situation makes one of them socially acceptable. You might say that the morality of the situation is relative. And that's what C.S. Lewis seems to miss here. He acknowledges that this is a thing that happens by doing what Greg has done here, saying that people try to justify it by reframing things to put them in the right, but the fact of the matter is that sometimes such a reframing does indeed put you in the right when doing something that would otherwise be immoral.
But the fact is, we can only do that for so long. It can be convincing for a while, but ultimately, we know that we're broken.
This is, once again, Greg assuming that he knows what's going on inside the heads of the people that he talks to, while ignoring what they say about it. I'm sure that he would insist that I do, in fact, feel guilty about living with my partner, and I can't prove to a third party that I don't, but the fact of the matter is that I know that I do not. And this is what I think he means by saying that it can be convincing. It's not convincing to the person you're talking to, because they know that you're full of shit, but it can be convincing to a third-party viewer if you're smarmy enough about it. But it's a rather thin facade, so you can't dwell on it too long, or else the problems with this tactic will start to become rather obvious. So you have to get your quick jab in and then change the subject before people realize just how stupid that jab was.
When I'm making the point that relativism is false, therefore some form of moral objectivism must be true, this has explanatory power. What it explains is the feelings that you have about the dark thing inside of you.
The Dark Thing Inside You was the name of my emo band in high school. Joking aside, there is nothing about moral relativism that precludes guilty feelings. If you violate your own morality, as everyone does at least occasionally, you feel guilty about that, regardless of the source of your morality. But hey, here's the thing about that. Those feelings of guilt are mostly based on how your actions impact other people. In other words, it's a sort of innate desire to avoid causing harm, something that would be evolutionarily beneficial in a social species. When I lose my temper with one of the kids, I don't feel guilty about that because it violated the abstract concept of morality that I have in my head. I feel guilty about that because I have hurt someone that I care about. The reason I don't feel guilty about living with my partner is because it's not doing any harm to anyone, even though it does violate Greg's abstract concept of morality.
And I asked the audience, I said, what is that feeling called when you look down inside of yourself? And the answer was guilt. And then different members of the audience were saying, guilt. I said, yeah, why do you feel guilty? Maybe you feel guilty because you are guilty.
And maybe you feel guilty because you hurt someone you care about. I find that to be far more compelling than some guy ate an apple after God said not to, therefore we are all guilty.
Sat in the running, okay? And then my response is the answer to guilt is not denial. That's relativism, postmodernism, if you will.
Well, I deny that I'm in denial. Ha! Good luck getting around that impenetrable barrier.
The answer to guilt is forgiveness.
Yes, but not forgiveness from your imaginary friend, forgiveness from the people that you have actually wronged. Vicarious forgiveness only serves to assuage your guilt without actually facing the root cause of that guilt.
And this, I said, is where Jesus comes in. Now, I actually really like that stepping stone, and I don't know if I planned that out in advance or not, but this is the way it came out, and I've remembered it ever since, because to me it's so poignant. It even touches my heart when I think of it now.
I'm glad you were able to so effectively tug on your own heartstrings. Good job.
Why do you feel guilty? Because you are guilty. The answer to guilt is not denial. It's forgiveness. And this is where Jesus comes in.
Oh, wait a minute. That profound, heart-wrenching revelation you had was that whole forgiveness is the antidote to guilt thing? Okay, buddy, clearly you don't spend enough time in church listening to the preachers, because that's the message in most churches, like 1 out of 3 Sundays at least.
So anyway, those lines are all meant to touch the heart, to go right past, in a sense, the intellect, and to speak directly to the existential awareness people have.
Okay, I think I need to start collecting bypass the intellect clips for a montage. Oh, wow. Would you look at that? This isn't the first time I've had that thought. There was already a montage ready to go. Well, let's stick Greg in there since he has just earned his spot. To be clear, this isn't strictly a montage of apologists saying they're bypassing the intellect, but it is a montage of them acknowledging that feelings are more important than facts when it comes to believing in Christianity.
Learn to circumnavigate or go around the person's intellect, the place of argument, and to speak directly to their conscience.
I didn't want to resist. I had a hunger to give in to this.
The Kalam cosmological argument, I go, that's a really good argument for God's existence, but I don't know how much it strikes people's emotions. I look at the moral argument and I go, that one hits people's emotions and it's intellectually strong as well.
Those lines are all meant to touch the heart, to go right past, in a sense, the intellect, and to speak directly to the existential awareness people have.
Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it. I think that this is a message which is so wonderful, so fantastic, that if there's any evidence that it's true, then it's worth believing in.
You're speaking truth to them that they can't deny deep inside themselves.
Yeah, so even if they tell you that you're wrong, you can rest easy in the knowledge that you were actually right, and they know it deep down inside. This whole thing just comes back to, I know what's in your head better than you do. Well, two can play at that game, Greg. I know you want to have a massive gay orgy because that is a desire that was placed inside of all of us by the almighty creator of the universe, Gay Unicorn Gary. You deny this truth in your unrighteousness, but Gay Unicorn Gary has put this desire in all of us, and the guilty feelings that you attribute to Christianity are really just because you're refusing to accept the blessed orgy of Gay Unicorn Gary. And I'm speaking this truth to you that you cannot deny deep inside yourself. You know, where Gay Unicorn Gary is going to be during the orgy.
They can deny it to you, to your face. Oh, no. But inside themselves, they know differently.
Yes, you know inside yourself that inside yourself is exactly where you want Gay Unicorn Gary.
Yeah, I think, especially today, people are likely to bring up moral concerns about the world or whatever. Yeah,
Right.
and if you just listen for those, say, oh, I thought you were a postmodernist.
Yeah.
Oh, are we actually talking about people who self-identify as postmodernists? Because they're actually a weird bunch. Not sure you'll actually be able to trap an honest-to-goodness postmodernist with such simplistic thinking. You're going to need to up your game a bit.
You think that what that country's doing is wrong? I'm really curious. Why do you think that? And
How does that work?
If that country is doing something that increases harm and decreases well-being, then it is wrong, because it is making more people miserable. Easy peasy.
And I would also say, if they're going to deny that there is any standard outside of themselves,
I don't. I mean, I also don't identify as a postmodernist, but yeah, the measurement of well-being and harm is external to me, but it's not absolute, just like your moral system that you pretend is absolute is also not absolute.
they still have a standard within themselves. They're still breaking their own standard.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure I didn't break my own standard at any point during this video. Comment down below if you noticed any point where I did. Engagement bait? What's that? I don't know what that is. Why would you say that?
And so you can ask, if you can get the conversation into that area, you can just say, oh, how do you deal with that? You feel like you have some sort of obligation to follow this. Who are you obliged to follow this? Who is holding you accountable? Yourself? Well,
My fellow travelers on Spaceship Earth. Why do we need God to hold us accountable when we do a much better job of it ourselves? As we briefly touched on last week regarding the book of Job, that is an entire book of the Bible that explains that good and bad things will happen to the righteous and unrighteous alike, because sometimes God be gambling with your livelihood, and there's nothing you can do about that. So it seems that us holding each other accountable is the only viable option here.
But
Then why- that doesn't make any
a lot of
sense.
people would say, "Oh, I'm accountable to myself,"
Yeah.
but all you have to do is change your view.
yes,
And
right.
then-
Just include that.
Yeah,
Why don't you just say that's good now?
Yeah. So
Because I care about other people and the effects that my actions have on them. I'm not a selfish douchebag. And quite frankly, the fact that you guys find that to be such an outlandish suggestion that you can't even think of is more than a little bit concerning.
Yeah. So, and then just say, well, what do you do with your guilt? That seems like it would be so hard to live with that if you have no way to have it forgiven by the person you're accountable to. How do you deal with that?
That is actually the best part of the system. If you want to actually be forgiven by the people you have hurt, then you need to talk to them, do something to make amends with them, do what you can to make it right. Not just to apologize in your head and brush it aside as though it's been taken care of. Taking God out of the equation and making us accountable to each other will lead to a better world for everyone. Pretending that apologizing to Jesus will make it better regardless of what you've done to actual living human beings will only serve to attract the worst kinds of people to your worldview, because they can continue being immoral pieces of shit as long as they apologize to Jesus at the end of the day. And that's it for this one. There's still like a minute left of their video, but they don't cover any new ground in that time. Today's comment of the day comes to us from FretBuzz1979, who says, "The moral example given here is pretty stupid. It's immoral to use outdated computers? It's immoral not to pay more than you have to? As if your work somehow becomes more valuable if the employer makes a lot of money? I think that's just Rhino's inner Marxist coming out. I think he's just bitter and jealous of rich people." This was on a video of mine from several years ago, and I'm sad to say that this person seems to have completely missed the point. The example of immorality I gave was the restaurant I worked at the time, where the owners are literal billionaires, but the restaurant's point-of-sale system was incredibly outdated, and that was a constant source of delay that frequently ruined a guest's experience. No joke, if a big table needed their bill split, it could potentially take up to half an hour, and if you made one single mistake while doing that, there was no way to undo it, so fixing that mistake could take another half hour. So the owners are literal billionaires to whom the $10,000 or so it would have taken to upgrade the computers would be nothing. And not only did they refuse to update them, they also paid all their workers as little as they could legally get away with. And yes, I do consider that to be immoral. But the point I was making with this example is that morality is, in fact, subjective. And when it's not about something big and obvious like murder, there ends up being far more disagreement about morality than apologists ever like to acknowledge. I used that example specifically because I knew people like you would disagree. So thanks for proving my point. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go to surfshark.com/rhino for 4 extra months of Surfshark for free. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I livestream with Surus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorships managers, Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the dishonest questions that guide the conversation towards the answer that is my channel. If you'd like to be a slimy conversational tactic, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time! As it turns out, I'm recording this at the same time as Eli Bosnick is live posting to Patreon about the coffee enema he's currently doing. So I might have gotten a little bit distracted with that. Did I typo that? Reading C.S. Lewis. And I just realized that clip that is getting labeled 9/11 is the one where we're talking about countries doing things wrong.